Welcome to the world's largest conference for podcasters by podcasters. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2018.
Let me see, by a show of hands, how many of you guys work in a corporate environment where you work with people that either don't know what a podcast is, can't spell podcast, or just have no inclination towards the things that you're interested in around this subject matter? Let's see a show of hands. Okay. All right, so we're not alone in this place. I think the idea when I came up with this and I pitched this idea, and I thought, I want to share my story of what I went through and kind of the obstacles that I had to deal with in order to get everybody in my organization, the higher ups, if you will, on board with this idea of how do we create a podcast? How do we extend our brand into that area? I mean, most companies are really good at, buying advertising, doing all kinds of things to get the word out about their organization, but they're not necessarily good at embracing the new technology that exists. And I think podcasting personally is one of the simplest ways for a corporate entity to extend their brand and really affect change both internally as well as externally. And so what I'd like to do today is to make my case for that by telling you a little bit about what I went through and then maybe give you guys some things to think about as you go back to your offices and start talking to the powers that be to twist their arms and say, hey, Bob, hey, Sue, hey, Sarah, hey, Tom, I really want to start a podcast for our company, and here's why I think we need to do it. So my goal is to give you some information along those lines today, and certainly the floor is open. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I speak on a regular basis, so you won't mess me up. I'm not timing this. I've got it all worked out, so I'm going to give you what you came for, hopefully. So I really want to just tell you a little bit about who Zwei Group is, and it's a really weird, funny name. Nobody can pronounce this name. They call it Zweig, they call it Ziggy. They do a lot of things with regard to that, and actually podcasting has helped people to pronounce the name a little bit better. So there is something with regard to brand awareness that brings value with a good podcast. But Zwei Group is a full-service management, consulting, and publishing firm that serves the design industry exclusively. So just think of anything in the built environment, this hotel, the lights that an electrical engineer would put in, the HVAC that hopefully if it works all day will stay nice and comfortable in this building. Those are the clients that we work with all over the world. And Zwei Group has been around for 30 years, so clearly they have a name, they have a brand, they have a recognition that they don't want to just leave to chance. They don't want to just say, well, we'll let anything happen or we'll let anybody go out there and represent us any old way. They obviously want to protect the shield, if you will, of the organization. And so that's who Zwei Group is. We, for almost 25 plus years, we've had a newsletter called the Zweig Letter. Now, the Zweig Letter is a publication that comes out every week, 48 times a year, talking about issues in the design industry from a project management standpoint, from a leadership standpoint. Talks a lot about everything that takes place in our industry, and we put out really good content on a regular basis. And so the Zweig Letter has had a foundation. It's a pillar in the design industry. If you talk to any really good engineer, any good architect, they've probably heard of the Zweig Letter and interacted with it. Now, you might be saying, well, Randy, what does this have to do with podcasting? Bear with me, I'm going to make my point in 1 second. So the Zweig Letter was a foundational item and a foundational tool within our tool belt of marketing and brand awareness. And a lot of you guys probably have some variation of this within your organization or within your company, depending on the industry that you serve, that you use to get out information to the rest of the community that's a community for you. And so that's why we created the Zweig Letter podcast. I was originally an owner in this company. I came back. Long story short, when I came back, I knew Mark Zweig, and I said, hey, I think, coming back here, I had been doing podcasts. I had actually been to the first podcast. We've actually been to all of them since its inception. I went to Blog World, New Media Expo, all that good stuff. So I've been doing podcasting in some way, shape, or form for quite some time. When I got back to Zweig Group in 2013, I said, we should do a podcast for the Zweig Letter. It's the easiest way for us to kind of be everywhere, right? You take that mentality that Pat Flynn and others talk about being everywhere. Well, I wanted to be everywhere with the company, and I thought, what's the simplest way to do that? Create a podcast. Well, what could I create a podcast about? Well, we've got this newsletter that's been running on a regular basis. People like it, they read it, they get a lot of high quality information. So why don't we just go ahead and create a podcast around that? And so that's what I did. Is I went on and took care of starting this podcast, and essentially it started out pretty anemic. And I just want to be really honest with you. The podcast actually sucked, okay? And I'm just giving you license to suck at first, because it's going to happen. I'm telling you, it's coming for you. And if nothing else, you can learn from some of my mistakes so that when you do start, whatever my ceiling was will be your floor. And you can just go that much faster, that much quicker, okay? But it wasn't the greatest. And it wasn't because I wasn't good, because I'm actually a pretty good speaker. I like talking about a wide variety of topics. I think I have a good understanding of that, and I understand this industry. But I just couldn't get my head around what would be the best way to represent this information. And so, guess what I did? Can anybody guess how I represented this podcast when we first started? Since it's a newsletter, what do you think I did? I read the articles. Jesus, you guys have heard it, haven't you? So I read the articles. I take stories from the Zweig Letter and memorialize them in podcast form. Got to be the worst decision I could have ever made. And probably about 3 months into it, I'm sitting there looking at the guy that's writing the article regurgitate it back to me as we're sitting there. I've got my headphones on and I'm listening to this, and I'm like, who the hell is going to listen to this? This stinks. So I had to have a real come to Jesus moment. Okay, and I don't know where you sit on that spectrum, but I had a moment where I realized I have to do better. I have to come up with something that really is going to interest people and really is going to keep them coming back. And there were a number of things that I had to consider. What could make it interesting? And again, honestly, I didn't have a framework to work from. There are other entities out there, other corporations that are doing podcasting at a high level, and I'm going to share some of those for you in a little bit as inspiration for what you might want to do. But I just didn't have a ton of inspiration. So I said, okay, well, what I'll do? I'll interview members of our team on the podcast, which was kind of cool because that allowed me as an individual in the company to interview other people in other departments to learn about what they do and to learn just a little bit about their personality. So I didn't make it totally work. I wanted people that listen to the podcast to learn that, Noah not only likes, working in this environment and doing what he does for the design industry, but Noah also likes to surf. And Noah, he grows cool plants in his backyard. He's got elephant ears everywhere, for those of you that love plants. I mean, whatever it was, I wanted to put a human face behind these voices, and I wanted people to gravitate towards them, and not just because, well, these are the guys that have been in the design industry for 30 years. I wanted to put some personality into it. So I started interviewing our team members. And then I said, wow, that works really well. So follow me here, because I'm going somewhere with this. Now, let's do this. We've got some really interesting clients. We have served the design industry for over 30 years successfully. We've been on the Inc. 500 list 3 times. So clearly we know what we're doing from a management consulting perspective. This is not our first rodeo. But I said, we have a ton of great clients. Let's call them up. And here's the rub. My intent was never so that I could build and generate more business. That was a byproduct of this next decision that I made, which was to reach out to some of the top CEOs, COOs, and leaders in our industry to say, hey guys, we have a podcast. The Zweig Letter podcast is an extension of our newsletter, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Yes, of course, Randy, we know the newsletter. Well, would you be willing to come on and be a guest? Yeah, I'll see about it. I'm going to send you to my marketing person and she'll coordinate everything, or he'll coordinate everything. So long story short, little by little, we started getting CEOs, COOs, heads of HR, heads of marketing, business development specialists starting to become guests on the podcast. And all of a sudden, it started to click. I started to see our counts go up. And here's the other thing. I didn't create this podcast just so that we could have thousands upon thousands of downloads, even though we do have that. I just created it as an outlet because it was something that I enjoyed doing. The reason why most of you are probably here are because you enjoy podcasting or you want to learn more about it. So there's obviously some inclination, some desire, something that you absolutely love about just this community of people that are here, just the idea of sharing your voice, that you don't know who will listen to it and how it will impact them. And I'll tell you a story about that in a second. But so I reached out to all these client firms and firms that we would ultimately have as clients. And of course, I reached out to firms that we weren't working with as well. And I made it a point to say, hey, we'd love to have you on the podcast. And then I went so far as to explain to them the branding aspects and benefits of you being on this podcast, because then you can now take that and put it on your site and share it with other people, which a lot of our clients did. The next thing I did is I interviewed leaders of firms that have achieved a high level of success in our industry. There's a ton of hugely successful architects and engineers and people that have built some amazing buildings like the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, and just outstanding individuals that have done some amazing things. So there's the artistic side of design I was able to tap into as well, and even reach a broader audience. So it wasn't just the people that wanted to know how was the business going. They also wanted to hear from those that were inspired by design in such a profound way. And so we were able to tap into those individuals. And then we also discussed ways that architects and engineers can develop both professionally and personally. So not only did I go from the mundane of just rereading and regurgitating articles, which we don't do anymore, mind you. So if you go to listen to this White Letter podcast now, there is no reading of any articles at any time. But we've gone all the way to the point where we're creating these life hacks sessions that we do, where we give engineers and architects different ways for them to cope with the stress. And for those of you anybody in the room know an engineer or an architect? It's a very highly stressful environment. Anybody in the room an engineer or an architect? Okay, but it's a very highly stressful environment. These people work multiple hours. I mean, when they're on deadline to get designs out the door, when buildings are being built, when roads are being done, I mean, there's a lot of work involved. And so there's a high degree of stress. And you couple that with a lack of empathy from the firms that they work for when it comes to professional development. So we've kind of been that voice for them. We've created one life hack session after another on podcasts about different ways that these individuals can do better in their jobs. Maybe when it comes to time management, when it comes to dealing with faulty leadership, how to overcome the stress of a daily job, how to build rituals or routines into your work environment to have more success. We've taken a lot of the normal stuff that you see out there, podcasts that you've listened to, some of the same ideas and templates, and reconfigured them for our industry, and had a lot of success and a lot of really positive feedback from our listening audience based on the fact that we're kind of scratching them where they itch. And so I say all that to say that there's so much that you can actually do with a corporate podcast. Now, there's two things to think about, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But when you think of a corporate podcast, a lot of times you think, well, is this something internal for our people, or is it something external for everybody else? It depends on how your organization is operating and what your company will allow you to do. Sometimes in a really large company, an internal podcast can be a godsend, because nobody looks at the intranet, right? How many of you guys go to your intranet in your company? Very few anymore. I mean, we get our feed, we get our information through social media, and because podcasting is almost a form of that, you are able to then kind of tap into people that you wouldn't normally have as an audience when you want to share and exchange ideas. That's the beauty of what a good internal corporate podcast is. So let's just talk real quickly, and again, this is Podcast Movement. There are a ton of vendors out there that will tell you about all of the amazing equipment that you can use to do your podcast on a regular basis. I'll be very honest with you. You can start here and build it up from there. It's as simple as this. Too often we try to complicate it, but just to give you a glimpse of what we did and how we started, and yeah, we're $1 million company, but it's amazing how $1 million company gets really cheap when it comes time to go on Amazon and order a $200 recorder, right? You're like, what, are you kidding me? You guys just spent X amount of money to fly all the leadership this place, and you won't buy me a Zoom or an Edirol recorder for $200? Yeah, it does happen. So what we did, we started off with simply an Audio-Technica ATR 2100. We had a Roland R05 Studio Wave MP3 recorder. I had some headphones, and I used GarageBand. You could use Audacity or Adobe or whatever works for you. I mean, again, you need to take away any impediments from you getting this thing started. And I'll make these slides available to you as well. I know a lot of you guys are taking pictures of stuff. You'll be doing that all day. I don't want you to run out of space on your phone, but that's what we did. We eventually upgraded to an editor. And I will just say that the editor is actually in the room right now. I didn't think he was going to come and hear me speak, but he has saved my bacon because I was doing everything. Now, I knew how to do it. I could sell the opportunity to my company and say, listen, we can keep it all in-house. We can make it cost effective. But once we started to get traction, then I had license to hire somebody like Joel Sharpton, who's in the room, and he's my editor, and I work with him with Pro Podcasting Services, and that's not a shameless plug for him. It's just that he's made my life that much simpler. When I do my recordings now, I can batch record a ton of episodes and then ship them off to him, and he's got it all taken care of. And then the other thing was, we have an outstanding creative writer in our office, and she likes doing a wide variety of things. She's a millennial, she's young. And she said, you know what, I'd love to write some of the show notes for the show. And I had been writing show notes for 2.5 years, and I was like, here you go. And I handed it right over. You'll be surprised how many people will step up to the plate and offer their services to you within your own organization because you are offering something up to them that they'd only been dreaming of, and you had the audacity, no pun intended, to go to your leadership and say, hey, we need to start a podcast, and I'll shepherd it. And then other people are like, you know what, can I help you? What do you need? And a lot of you guys work in organizations where there are people like that that can help you through this process. And so I really want you to enlist their support, enlist their help, because it will help you move along the way. But make no mistake, there will be some long hours involved. There'll be some extra work. People will start to look at you crazy and say, is this something billable? Are we making any money off of this? That's the real question that people are going to ask. And I'll tell you at the end a little bit about what the actual direct ROI. Everybody know what ROI stands for? Return on investment that you would achieve in your organization. And it's going to vary depending on the company, depending on the type of services or products that you sell or offer. But I really want to tell you that if you get into this with a simple passion to create a really good product, the rest of itself will work itself out. So don't get obsessed about, well, how am I going to do this or how am I going to do that? Just create amazing content, and the rest of itself will take care of itself. And then the last thing I got was I upgraded about 1.5 years ago, a Zoom H4 recorder with XLR inputs. And the nice thing about that from a technical standpoint is just that I'm able to plug my Audio-Technica ATR 2100s directly into that Zoom. They have a Zoom 6 too that will take more than 2 XLRs. So if you want to be in a room where you're going to do multiple interviews with multiple people, that may be a good investment to have. But anyway, that's the equipment. And you see, you notice I put the pig there with the calculator, because there's always going to be somebody asking you, how much is all this stuff going to cost? And honestly, you can do it for less than $1,000. It's not going to cost you a lot of money. I mean, when we first started, I think I used my own personal headphones, and I got the Roland R05 and the Audio-Technica, and the GarageBand was already on my Mac. I spent less than $350. And I told the company, I said, listen, don't even worry about paying me back right now. I'm going to buy this. If it works, I'll submit an expense report later down the road. Now, you believe I did submit that expense report eventually. But depending on, and I understand what some of you might be dealing with, that you're saying, well, Randy, you don't understand my company. They're penny pinchers, they're tightwads. They don't want to spend money on anything that's not going to directly benefit them right now, right away. And you've got to get them to see the big picture. And that's a much harder conversation to have. And so hopefully that this actual presentation will be good enough that you can download it off the virtual ticket and take it to your COO or somebody in your company, the CEO, and convince them and say, see Bob, see Sarah, this is why we need to be doing a podcast. And that's ultimately what can come out of it. So what the fruits of the labor that I've put in over the last 3+ years has been that we've done over 125+ episodes. We come out every week at 12 noon on a Friday. And we've interviewed everybody. Noah Hunt is an outstanding M&A consultant in our company. Sean Terrio Smith is a great story about him. And the reason why I put him up here is he's a project engineer with a highly successful civil engineering firm based in Texas. For those of you, anybody from Texas in here? Okay, Austin. Well, this company's in Austin, Big Red Dog. Really interesting name because in our industry, the names are, fill in the blank, name of the owner, engineering. Fill in the blank, name of the owner, architecture. But their name is Big Red Dog. So you can imagine they have a little fun with it. Clifford is their mascot. And I've been interviewing both Sean as well as the founder of the company several times on my podcast. And actually their podcast episodes outside of some of our Life Hacker episodes have been the highest downloaded episodes, because what we found was that as we started to put this information out there, engineers were listening. They wanted to know, what were other engineering firms doing? How were they setting themselves apart? And man, it's a funny name of an engineering firm. I want to find out more about them. So much so that these guys have actually gone off. I encouraged them. They stepped out and they created their own podcast out of an engineering company. It's called Unleashed. You can get it on iTunes, and it's actually a really good podcast. And there are 9 episodes in, and I encouraged them. I told them, whatever you do, you want to get 10, 15, people say 7 is the magic number, but honestly, 10 or 15 episodes under your belt just to get that momentum going. You don't want to start off with just a few episodes and then kind of see where it goes and see what kind of feedback you get. Just, if you guys decide to dip your toe in the water, just jump in. Just jump in and do it. And again, if you have to get that buy-in from others that are higher up in your organization, you just want to tell them this is a long process. This is not a short-term fix for what challenges your company may be dealing with from a sales perspective or anything like that. This is a much different idea. Big Red Dog saw it as an ability to brand them. Now they're thinking about, this is what's happened. Just on the short success that they've had with their podcast, now they're trying to think about other podcasts that they could create to serve their marketplace, not just their company, but their marketplace. So, for instance, if you serve an industry that deals with, shoe leather or whatever, it could be anything. There's a market for that. There are people that work in that industry that they eat, sleep, and drink shoe leather. So you have to figure out a way that, how do I take this information, make it something that people want to hear? And it doesn't have to be long, 15, 20 minutes. Our average episode is between 30 and 35 minutes, and some can go longer. We've done a few that are a little bit shorter, but the idea is that you want to record. You just want to say record. I want to hear everybody say it in the room. Just say record. Right. No, I actually just wanted you to say record, which was fine. But you said just say record. That's fine. You get the idea. I want you guys to get out and publish something, because if you do that, you'll see that it will grow from there. So we've done over 125+ episodes. That really helped us out. The thing that I want you to be thinking about, and the big takeaway from this, is I want you to think about what's inspirational. What will change for your organization? For me, it was just, we've been through two rounds of ownership, and the inspiration for the Zweig Letter podcast for me was that Mark Zweig, the founder of the company, who is a well-respected individual in the design space. He's known by everyone. He's highly regarded as a business. He can build businesses, grow them, and help them be profitable and successful. My inspiration was, I wanted to take what he knew up in his head, and I wanted to put it in a podcast format. And that's essentially what we've done. A lot of the episodes that we do are surrounded around articles that he's written, the topics and themes that he's talked about, that he's most passionate about. He's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. I mean, this guy's been highly successful. He's taken 2 different firms to the Inc. 500 list, which very few people do. He's been highly successful, but the bottom line, he was my inspiration. So you need to find an inspiration within your organization that will get you to say, you know what, this is why I want to do this podcast. Because if it's just about you doing it so that you can say, hey, I did this podcast, here we go, I've created it, you sent me the podcast movement, now we have a podcast, it's got to be a little bit more than that. So you have to find your why. Like Simon Sinek says, you got to start with your why. And that in my mind is the inspiration that exists for you to create this podcast in the first place.